Christian persecution is a growing problem around the globe, affecting hundreds of millions of people.
Good. A series of bomb attacks in the country of Sri Lanka.
1 in 8 Christians around the world face prosecution. So first, let's start with some statistics to set the perspective. Every day, 13 Christians are killed worldwide because of their faith. 12 churches or Christian buildings are attacked, and 12 Christians are unjustly arrested or imprisoned, and yet another 5 are abducted. Christianity might not be the first religion you think of for being prosecuted, yet 4,761 Christians were killed for their faith between October 2019 and September 2020. Over 340 million Christians were living in countries where they might suffer high levels of discrimination because of their faith. I interviewed Fionn Shiner, who is the Parliamentary and Press Officer at Aid to the Church in Need, to find out more.
ACN is a Catholic charity. It's our main mission is to support persecuted Christians wherever they may be. And we do this primarily through the form of projects. So we have project partners on the ground, and they will make requests for funding for a church that's a burnt out church that needs rebuilding, or psychological support for women who were forced to be the wives of Boko Haram fighters, or it might be giving money to a soup kitchen that helps Syrian refugees.
Could you maybe tell us why people don't know about the crisis so much? Why?
I think number one, probably most important, is that the vast majority of this stuff happens a long way away. Places like Pakistan, places like Nigeria, Egypt, Iraq, Syria. So they're not always what people want to read about because it's far away and it doesn't necessarily feel like it's going to affect them. So I think there's an element of that. It's probably a big element of that. But I do also think that perhaps there's a bit of a misconception of what your average Christian looks like. The vast majority of Christians, practicing Christians and practicing Catholics, are in the global south. So Africa, for example, is booming with they have more Catholics by the year, got lots of vocations, etc. So perhaps there isn't quite. I think maybe perhaps in our mind, Christians equals Westminster Abbey and old men in suits and stuff, but actually the reality is that most of the world's Christians are not like that at all, and that they live in far-flung places.
And why are Christians getting persecuted? Like, who's persecuting them, really?
It depends on the country. In China or North Korea, they're being persecuted because they're authoritarian government. They don't want any opposition, and a faithful Christian, a faithful Catholic, is going to worship God and is going to have Christ above Kim Jong-un or whatever, and that can make authoritarian governments feel very threatened. And that was certainly the case in the Soviet Union as well, because Christians, by definition, will always have a higher authority than a dictator, and so it's a control issue because they don't feel that they can control them. And then, of course, Christians not only have the higher authority in terms of God and Christ, but there's also the fact that they are faithful to the church as well. So in North Korea in particular, Christians are seen as Western. They're associated with the Western world, and therefore they're looked upon as almost like foreign spies. But that is the case in the Middle East as well, where Islamist groups, Islamic extremists, think that Christians are Western. Therefore, they're faithful to America. They're faithful to the UK just by virtue of being Christian. But of course, Christianity began in the Middle East. That's where it started. Some of those communities in, particularly in Iraq, they can trace their history all the way back to the apostolic times. So actually, if anything, Christianity is Eastern. It started there, and it was there for hundreds of years before it was here in the West. So there is a misconception of Christians being Western, and of course that touches on in many places of the world it is Islamic extremism, and that is one of the reasons why Christians are persecuted, and that's just the facts, really. So under Daesh in Iraq and Syria, it amounted to genocide. They just wanted to get rid of them. I mean, it wasn't just the Christians. They wanted to get rid of anything that wasn't their particular stringent interpretation of Islam. But Islamic extremism is it's not really, I suppose it never was, but it's certainly not now confined primarily to the Middle East. But all across Africa, there are Islamic extremists who are persecuting Christians because they're Christian.
So maybe could you tell us some examples of how they're being persecuted, like what's actually happening to them?
I might as well talk about our report, which is called Hear Her Cries, the kidnapping, forced conversion and sexual victimization of Christian women. That looks at the way that Christian women in many parts of the world are frequently kidnapped, abused in very unpleasant ways, and then they are forced to convert from Christianity to, in many cases, Islam, and then they're often forced to marry their abductor as well. And these are very young girls, 14, 15, 16, where this will be happening, and they'll be forced to marry a man in his 40s or 50s. So that's just one facet of how Christians are persecuted, but it's not always that dramatic and that clear cut. Because in Pakistan, where this forced conversion is a big issue, there's also a more kind of low-level discrimination whereby, and I don't think this is quite the case now. Well, we're getting mixed reports whether this is still happening, but there was certainly a time when jobs cleaning sewers and cleaning toilets and stuff like that were only allowed for Christians.
How can people help?
First and foremost, pray. We believe in the power of prayer at ACN, and lots of voices imploring the help of God is powerful. It's really very powerful. So we can never underestimate the power of prayer. But also, of course, you can give money to ACN and support our projects, and you can try and sort of read up on what's actually happening. Read our press releases, read our reports, and the report we've got. There's another organisation called Open Doors, which is very good. There's lots of news sites that cover this topic, and you can sort of read up on this stuff and share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it online, social media, because the more people who know what's going on, then the more likely there will be an imperative to actually do something about it. And then you can always write to your MPs as well and ask them to do something as well. I mean, we do have parliamentary outreach, and we work with MPs and brief them and ask them to ask questions and debates and all that kind of thing. But it's always more powerful coming from a constituent than it is coming from someone like me.
So what is Red Wednesday? Well, it's an event that takes place every year to spread the word about Christian persecution by teaching in schools, telling people online, and most notably, lighting landmarks up red. This is all managed by the charity Aid the Church in Need, and it's quite incredible to see some of the landmarks being lit up red. So what can you do to help? Firstly, you can pray because it's free and there's no cost to you. Secondly, you can share this video with a family member or a friend, as it really helps spread the word about the crisis at the moment. And lastly, if you are in the position where you have money, you can donate at acnuk.org.